Hello, Christ Church. Paul Fowler, our Lake Forest campus pastor. We are walking through the story of the birth of Jesus Christ, and we find ourselves again today after the story of the birth of Christ. And our passage today, Luke chapter 2, verse 21 through 24, is something probably you've never heard preached in a sermon. And if you had, it's somewhat rare because so much of the Christmas story kind of stops right as soon as Jesus is born and the shepherds come or the wise men come with their gifts. But this takes place actually 8 days after Jesus had been born. What we find in Luke chapter 2, verse 21 is that there is the day that you would actually circumcise the child. And the reason that it's 8 days is because there were 7 days that a woman, after she was given birth, according to Mosaic law, was considered unclean. I was talking about this with one of my staff members a few weeks ago, and what was so interesting is it could seem like, well, wait, why would that person be considered unclean? She's just done this beautiful thing. She's given birth to this child. Why is it that? Well, as you can imagine, if on the 8th day, after this period of uncleanness, you would have to go, how rested would you be if there was no period of rest or no period of this time for letting the woman just be? That the next day she was supposed to go into the temple and have the child circumcised. Well, that's why there's kind of a purpose and a plan in what God is doing here, that there is this 7-day break before the child would come and be circumcised. And it's also on this 8th day that we see here that he was now officially given the name Jesus. Again, that's the derivative of Joshua. That means God saves. Jesus is named exactly what he has come to do. What comes next, what we see through verse 22 through 24, is that there had to be a time of consecration. So according to Mosaic law, this would be 33 days after the birth of the child, that you would come to the temple and you would offer a sacrifice to consecrate the child. And this is fascinating because Jesus ultimately would be the one-time sacrifice for all things, because the consecration actually finds its way all the way back in Exodus in the time of the Passover. Because it was during Passover that a lamb would be killed in place of the firstborn son, that God would pass over judgment on that home. So that was kind of built in, that there would be this necessary sacrifice so that when Jesus came, everybody would say, oh yeah, we've known all along this is how it would play out. A lamb was to come to die. Jesus is the lamb to die in our place. But also what happened as part of the Passover is that every single year, or every single time there was a birth of a firstborn son, a lamb was to be killed in his place. Now, what we see here in verse 24 is that Luke mentions a pair of dove or 2 young pigeons. So for Jesus' parents not to be offering the sacrifice of a lamb to consecrate means that they're taking the poorer sacrifice. If you were poor, you could do the 2 doves or 2 young pigeons. So this is a very common birth by a very common family. But what's extraordinary is that they are consecrating the person who was going to be the consecration for all of us. They are offering a sacrifice for the person who's going to be the sacrifice for all of us, the person that is Jesus Christ. You see, this consecration meant something for Mosaic law, but who Jesus was and the sacrifice that he eventually would become for us means something for all of us. That's what's so important about this Christmas story. We can reflect on this beautiful child that comes and the birth and the good news, and it's God with us. But what we see here, right as Jesus' story is about to take off and who he is, we see this underpinnings of a sacrifice, an atonement, someone that's come in our place. And that is the good news and the hope of the Christmas story, is that salvation has come, but it requires a sacrifice. I hope you take some time today, sit back and rethink and thank God that he is that sacrifice for us.